Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you all for the work that you're doing on this. It's exceptionally important. I have a lot of folks that will catch me about the access to data that Facebook or Google or different internet providers will have or Microsoft will have, and they'll say they have access to a lot of data, and I will typically smile at them and say no one has more access to your data than your cell phone does, because they have all of those plus a whole lot more, and it is remarkable to me how little focus there has been on the security around everything that goes through your cell phone. And for folks in rural Oklahoma, they would tell you that many of their irrigation systems are connected to their cell phones. Control systems for valves are connected to cell phones. So whether it's energy, agriculture, manufacturing, it all goes through this cell network. And so thank you for your focus on the 5G, on the security, because we cannot get this wrong. Because every bit of our data and every bit of our manufacturing and our systems and our inventions all go through this system. So I appreciate you doing this. Let me come back to the spectrum conversation. Why isn't there a conversation on the mid-band right now?
Well, there is a conversation, Senator, on mid-band spectrum right now. My primary concern is that the FCC during this administration has chosen to put all of its early efforts on high band. We have auctioned the 24 gigahertz band, the 28 gigahertz band. By the end of this year, we will have the 37 gigahertz band, the 39 gigahertz band, and the 47 gigahertz band.
So why not the mid-range?
You and I have the same question. I think we should have prioritized the 3.5 gigahertz band and done it 2 years ago, because those are the airwaves that are going to help us reach rural America and urban America. We're making a mistake, and the rest of the world is not auctioning high-band spectrum. There are 16 nations right now that have already brought mid-band spectrum to market. That's where the bulk of the economy is going for wireless, for 5G, and the United States is behind.
So let me switch topics on that, because that's helpful. We'll follow up on it. Let me switch topics on the hardware side of the manufacturing in this system. You've all mentioned that one of the issues we have is not necessarily the software. We have a lot of software that's currently very innovative. It's the hardware manufacturing side of that. What is missing in the hardware side of it is that we've just outsourced the hardware for so long to China and to other places that we just don't have the locations. Is it a raw material issue? It's certainly not a creativity nor capital issue. We have that in the United States. So what is the gap on the manufacturing side?
On the manufacturing side, I believe I've heard that 40% of the makeup of the network is actually American manufacturing companies. It's the RAN, the radio access networks, that the United States does not have a hardware manufacturer.
Correct. That's the part I'm talking about.
Right, right. So I think when we talk about the software-defined networks and how are we going to innovate around that problem, that is where we're going to inject the innovation to create the networks of the future. So that's what we're focusing on now. And we believe there's beta testing as we speak, and that it could be a reality in as early as 18 months.
So you're saying the radio access is not as needed if we can have a software workaround?
Correct.
Senator, I just point out that the reason that the old Bell Labs became Lucent, that got bought by Alcatel, a French company that got bought out by Nokia. So there's still research going on in America in this area. It's just that it's owned at the headquarters level in Europe. And there's going to be new manufacturing by Ericsson in Florida. There's Samsung fabrication of chips going on in Austin, Texas. They put $17 billion into it. So there's going to be manufacturing. The long-term solution, I think, is along the lines of the acting administrator's point. But we do see manufacturing here. And there's obviously competition coming from China that's massively subsidized. Right. So that's really where the market is failing, is in the subsidization.
Mr. Krebs, this is something you track all the time on the supply chain issues. As you know extremely well, we have one bad link with data. That is the spot to get a chance to infiltrate unlimited amounts of data. When you start looking at supply chain issues, where do you see the gap? Where do you see the engagement? What is it that the United States Congress and the United States government needs to be involved in? Or what do we need to do less of to allow that market to be able to grow?
So I think supply chain is an emerging area of focus for certainly my agency, but the rest of the administration. It's much like cybersecurity. It's about identifying where the risk lies, managing that risk appropriately, and putting your attention where the gaps are. So this time last year, or a little bit earlier, we established an Information Communications Technology Supply Chain Risk Management Task Force. Again, all the agencies here are represented on that task force, 20 federal agencies, 20 tech companies, and 20 comms companies. 4 different work streams. One, first and foremost, is what's information sharing look like on supply chain risk? risks. Second, what is a threat profile or the categories of threats we need to be concerned about. Third is how do we develop trusted qualified bidders lists, kind of whitelisting. And lastly, how do we incentivizing purchasing from original equipment manufacturers and trusted resellers to eliminate the counterfeit problem. This is an incredibly important area of work because it gives everyone, whether you're super sophisticated, highly leveraged and invested in supply chain issues, or down to just your average somewhere subcontractor in a supply chain conversation, gives them a common operating language or a common framework by which to assess. One of the big things that I think came out of this conversation is when we talk about information sharing, when we talk about sharing threats of companies that may be of concern, there are examples. The National Regulatory Framework 10 CFR Part 21 has a reporting of defects and noncompliance. If you come across something in supply chain, you have to report it. There's no similar standard for other high risk areas of infrastructure.
Is that a gap in law? Is that a gap in regulatory?
I think it's at this point it's probably both, but I'd focus on how do you have a company that comes across an issue with an untrusted vendor. They have a significant civil litigation risk for publicly outing that company. How do we give them the appropriate information sharing protections that they can make a report into whether it's the government or other industry partners, get away from antitrust issue, any competitive issues. This is an area that we think needs more attention.
Let me bring up two quick things on this. One is, as we're going through supply chain conversation, we need to deal with the raw materials and rare earth minerals. That has been a weak area for us as a nation. We have been complacent to allow rare earth minerals to come from China and to say, well, they're going to manufacture, they're going to mine, and they're going to handle all that, but we have environmental issues, and so we're not going to do rare earth minerals. We can do it cleaner and better than anywhere else in the world, and we should lean in on that one. That's an area where we need to identify. And Ms. Rosenmore, so one of the areas that is not related to this, but every time I see anyone from the FCC, I bring up one issue with them, and that is prison cell phone jamming. We're not going to talk about it, but I just want to be able to bring it up and to say it is allowed in federal prisons. It's not allowed in state prisons, and that is an area of gap in law that we need to address, but we need FCC's engagement on working through standards for when that jamming device is actually done and tested. They want to test against a group of standards. FCC is the one who has to establish that. We have major problems with contraband cell phones across the entire country in prisons, and we need the FCC to engage in this area. And I know it's a surprise question to you, and I'm not going to ask you to respond to it, but I'm not going to also miss the opportunity to say we need that. Thank you.